Board questions before approving a new facility. Management the board a site, a budget, and a timeline. Increasingly, the assumptions buried inside that timeline, not the budget itself, are what determine whether the project actually delivers the return it was approved on. Capital Committee memos are good at pricing land, labor, and construction. They are worse at pricing the infrastructure a project depends on but doesn't control. The utility's queue position, the wastewater permit, the transmission upgrade, nobody at the company has any authority over. Environmental due diligence consultants who work capital site selection describe a consistent pattern. The most expensive project delays come from common, foreseeable issues identified too late to avoid a redesign, not exotic ones. For boards approving large facility investments, 5 questions surface most of that risk before capital is committed rather than after. Has the utility actually committed to a date or just confirmed interest? A utility's willingness to serve a site and a utility's contractual commitment to a delivery date are different documents with very different legal weight, and management's site selection memo doesn't always distinguish between them. Projects that sequence power, permitting, and capital together before groundbreaking consistently outperform projects that negotiate each piece separately after the fact. A board should ask whether the energization date in the capital plan is backed by a signed interconnection agreement with penalties for missed deadlines, or by an informal assurance that could shift by years without any contractual consequence to the utility. What does a 6-month delay actually cost, and who absorbs it? When a project's operational start date slips 12 to 24 months, capital stays deployed without generating the returns it was approved on, and in a higher rate environment, the carrying cost of that delay is materially larger than it would have been 5 years ago. Few capital committee memos model this explicitly. What the board actually needs is a straight sensitivity table. What happens to the project's return if energization slips 6 months, 12 months, or 18, and whether that risk sits with the company, a contractor, or nobody at all? Has anyone verified water and wastewater capacity with the same rigor as power? Power gets the executive attention. Water and wastewater capacity often don't get equivalent scrutiny until a permit application stalls. Companies that treat environmental and infrastructure constraints as design inputs from the outset rather than downstream compliance issues consistently avoid the redesigns that erode both budgets and timelines. A wastewater capacity shortfall discovered mid-permitting can add millions of dollars and months of delay, the same category of risk as a power interconnection problem, just less visible in most board presentations. That's the real question: whether water and wastewater capacity received the same independent verification as electric service, or whether it was simply assumed to be adequate. How much of this business case assumes infrastructure isn't the constraint? Tax incentives and land price comparisons are the easiest numbers to put in a board deck, which is exactly why they tend to dominate the narrative even when they're no longer the deciding factor. A capital case built primarily around incentive value, with infrastructure readiness treated as a footnote, is often a case built on the assumptions that were true 5 years ago, rather than the constraints that are binding today. What matters is whether management can rank the actual decision factors in order, not the factors that were easiest to quantify, and explain why infrastructure readiness ranks where it does. What happens to this asset's value if the surrounding grid never catches up? A facility can clear every diligence hurdle at approval and still lose competitiveness years later if the transmission capacity it was counting on for expansion never materializes around it. That risk rarely shows up in a discounted cash flow model built at approval, because it depends on infrastructure decisions outside the company's control and years in the future. A board should ask what the facility is worth if the local grid stays exactly as constrained as it is today, not just what it's worth under the capacity expansion assumptions embedded in the original business case. None of these 5 questions require boards to become utility engineers or environmental permitting specialists. They require boards to stop treating infrastructure readiness as a management-level operating detail and start treating it as what it has become: a capital allocation risk with the same potential to erode returns as a bad revenue forecast, and one that deserves the same level of independent scrutiny before the money is committed. You've been listening to Sustainability Soundbites by Environment and Energy Leader. For partnership opportunities, please reach out to our team.